Welcome back to Codemaster Coach, your medical coding tutor. Guys, we are still reviewing the 2025 official ICD-10-CM coding guidelines. We're almost finished. Can you believe it? We are almost finished. All right, so let me minimize my box and let's review these guidelines. We are at admission from observation unit. Number one, again, admission following medical observation. Let's review the guidelines. All right, the guidelines say when a patient is admitted to an observation unit for a medical condition which either worsens or does not improve and is subsequently admitted as an inpatient of the same hospital for this same medical condition, the principal diagnoses would be the medical condition which led to the hospital admission. All right, I have some notes on this one. Think about your healthcare settings. Usually we start in a physician's office. If things are critical, we can't wait, we go to an emergency room. If our condition is not sick enough to be admitted to the hospital, but risky, physicians tend to put us on what's called observation status. Some of us go in and have same-day surgery. Go in that morning, have your surgery, you're home that evening. And then there's inpatient stay. So my first question is, which settings are inpatient settings and which settings are outpatient settings? So looking back at these 5 different settings, a physician's office is considered outpatient. Emergency room is considered outpatient. Observation, even if you're laying in the same bed you would lay in if you were in the hospital, if you're considered to be under observation status, you're outpatient. Same day surgery, come in, have your surgery, go home, that's considered an outpatient setting, outpatient surgery. And an inpatient stay is the only inpatient setting. My next question says, the setting also corresponds to the classifications used. So, if you're in the physician's office, which is an outpatient setting, the classifications you'll code from are ICD-10-CM for diagnoses and CPT for procedures. In the emergency room, because it's considered an outpatient setting, again, your diagnoses are coded with ICD-10-CM and your procedures are coded with CPT. Observation status, which is also considered outpatient, your diagnoses again are coded with ICD-10-CM and your procedures are coded with CPT. For same-day surgery, which is an outpatient setting, your diagnoses are coded with ICD-10-CM and the procedure, the surgery, is coded with CPT. And then for your inpatient stay, which is an inpatient setting, your diagnoses are captured with ICD-10-CM and your procedures are captured with ICD-10-PCS. Notice the difference in the procedures for outpatient versus inpatient. Okay? I have a couple of notes, my purple Codemaster Coach notes that just says, think about this situation. Patient was admitted to observation. So what is observation? Observation is not inpatient status. Observation is considered outpatient. And your observation stays usually last 24 hours, but can last up to 48 hours. Observation status. My other purple note here, Codemaster Coach note, says observation status is when a patient is not sick enough to be admitted to the hospital, but there is a concern that the patient should not go home. And an example is elderly patients that live alone. A lot of times if they come to the emergency room, physicians aren't comfortable sending them home alone. And so if they may overdo it, get up, fall, etc. So a lot of times the physician will put them on what's considered observation status until they're strong enough to go home alone. Another note I have is if a patient is admitted, then they meet criteria for inpatient status due to conditions not improving or worsening. And the principal diagnosis is the medical condition that led to the inpatient status, whatever that condition is. Okay? All right, we're down to number 2, admission following post-operative observation. So let's go to the guidelines. Number 2, when a patient is admitted to an observation unit to monitor a condition or a complication, remember we talked about the difference between complication and comorbidities, but when the patient is admitted to the observation unit to monitor their condition or complication, then that develops following an outpatient surgery and then is subsequently admitted as an inpatient of the same hospital. Hospitals should apply the Uniform Hospital Discharge Data Set, UHDDS, definition of principal diagnoses as that condition established after study to be chiefly responsible for occasioning the admission of the patient to the hospital for care. So let me say this again. Patient came in and had outpatient surgery. So if a patient is admitted to an observation unit to monitor a condition that develops following this outpatient surgery and then is subsequently admitted as an inpatient of the same hospital, then you need to look for that condition established after study that was responsible for causing the patient to be admitted to the hospital rather than going home after their outpatient surgery. Was it a complication? Did something go wrong? And if it did, then that's the reason for the admission to the hospital, not the surgery. Okay, so think about what's going on here. So again, that's admission following post-operative observation. All right, go back to my handout number 2, and it takes us right to J, admission from outpatient surgery. So let's see what admission from outpatient surgery says. When the patient receives surgery in the hospital's outpatient surgery department and is subsequently admitted for continuing inpatient care at the same hospital, the following guidelines should be followed in selecting principal diagnoses for inpatient admission. If the reason for the inpatient admission is a complication, remember up here we talked about complication, then assign the complication as the principal diagnoses. If no complication or other condition is documented as the reason for the inpatient admission, then assign the reason for the outpatient surgery as the principal diagnoses. And if the reason for the inpatient admission is another condition unrelated to the surgery, then assign the unrelated condition as the principal diagnoses. Because again, we go back to our UHDDS definition of principal diagnoses is that condition established after study to be chiefly responsible for occasioning the admission of the patient to the hospital. What was the reason that the patient was admitted? All right, let's go back. We're down to K, admission encounters for rehabilitation. Let's go to the guidelines. When the purpose for the admission or encounter is rehabilitation, then sequence first the code for the condition for which the service is being performed. For example, for an admission or encounter for rehabilitation for right-sided dominant hemiplegia following a cerebral vascular infarction, then report code I-69.351, hemiplegia and hemiparesis following cerebral infarction affecting right dominant side as the first listed or principal diagnoses. Okay? Now, if the condition for which the rehabilitation service is being provided is no longer present, report the appropriate aftercare code as the first listed or principal diagnoses unless the rehabilitation service is being provided following an injury. So it says for rehabilitation services following active treatment of an injury, assign the injury code with the appropriate 7th character for subsequent encounter, because remember they've already been They've already seen acute care. Now they're coming in for rehab. So this is going to be a subsequent encounter as the first listed or principal diagnoses. For example, if a patient with severe degenerative osteoarthritis of the hip underwent hip replacement and the current encounter or admission is for rehabilitation, then code Z47.1, aftercare following joint replacement surgery, as the first listed or principal diagnoses. And if the patient requires rehabilitation post-hip replacement for the right intertrochanteric femur fracture, then report code S72.141D, displaced intertrochanteric fracture of right femur, subsequent encounter, that's your D, subsequent encounter for closed fracture with routine healing as the first listed or principal diagnoses. All right. That's it. Yep. On my next video, we're going to be going into reporting additional diagnoses. But again, I want to make sure you're understanding the goal of the principal diagnoses is to identify that reason after study. What reason brought the patient in? A lot of times patients will come in for a sign or a symptom, a headache, but after study, if the headache was found to have been a brain aneurysm, then after study, the brain aneurysm becomes your principal diagnoses. And just remember that first listed, that's why I said no matter what state I'm in, you're in, wherever you are, if we read the same chart, our principal diagnoses, which is our first listed diagnoses, should be the same because that's going to be determining the reimbursement for that stay. All right, guys, hopefully I've given you enough of a review of principal first listed diagnoses. In the next video, we're going to be talking about the other diagnoses that we also capture for inpatient stays or for visits as patients come in. All right, guys, thanks. Any questions, feel free to email me at codemastercoach, all one word, @gmail.com. I'll see you in the next one.